This kit will include everything you need for a basic installation in a JK. First thing we're going to do is pop off the access panel. It gives us access to the back side of the switches. Pop out the 4 clips on the back of the switches and disconnect the electrical. With the switches out, you're going to want to separate the back panel from the switch pod by popping the clips out with a small screwdriver, pocket knife, or something sharp. Once the back panel comes off, remove the little circuit board. There's nothing really holding it in. And the rubber gasket. That leaves the housing open and ready to cut up. Now we're going to remove the off-road section of the switch panel. Don't worry, your Jeep will still be capable. We typically tape off the outer parts of the switch just to keep the scratches and things like that to a minimum. We like to use a Dremel, some type of a cutoff wheel, or a sharp knife like an X-Acto knife to get rid of this part of the switch. We're basically just trying to remove this so that we can get to the void behind here, because this is where the new switch bezel is going to be installed. Once the front is removed, there's one more little support back here that needs to be removed as well. Cut it out with a knife or with your Dremel. Continue cleaning up the edges so that the new switch panel can slide in. You can do this with your die grinder or your pocket knife. If you want to get closer to this edge where the 2 factory switches are, you can easily use a screwdriver to pop little tabs out on the rocker switch, and the faceplate pops right out. That will give you a lot better access to the last remaining bits of that front plate without messing up your pretty parts. Use a file with a good sharp edge to get in there and clean out the corners so that you have a good tight fit. Do this all the way around on all the edges, and then test fit the new switch bezel, making sure it fits nice and snug. Once that works, take the switch bezel back out. Take off anything that you have that's protecting the original switch bezel. At this point, snap the original rocker switch cover back in, and now it's time to modify the back panel of the original switches. We're going to end up cutting this panel right about here. This gives plenty enough room to run the new wires to the new switches through the original switch compartment. Use whatever you want to make the cut here. A knife or a saw. Bandsaw works good, or a hacksaw. The Dremel was just close, so I used that. The Dremel's nice too because you can clean up the other surfaces and knock off any little dangling things. Ultimately, this is what it should look like when you're done. All your switches put back together with your new switch panel installed. Next, we're going to get into tapping into the actual locker relays. These are located on the passenger side in the engine compartment, right next to the battery. Popping off the clips that hold the wiring harness to the inner fender and firewall will give you better access to those relays. Each relay has a purple wire going into the bottom. That's the wire that we'll tap into. We'll use the 2 blue T-connectors that are in the kit to splice into the purple wires. It's pretty easy to do. Just put the T-connector around it and crimp it with a pair of pliers. Remove some insulation from both ends of the blue wire in the kit and crimp the male connectors on and insert them into the T connector. Route the 2 blue wires across the engine bay to the other side of the Jeep, and I'll show you a great way to route the wires so that we can get them inside and to our switch panel. There's a small hole located behind that panel we removed earlier. It's usually filled with foam, and we're going to take a highly technical tool and ram it through there with a little hook on the end. Since we haven't cut the blue wire yet, one end will have a loop on it. Hook those two together, and that's exactly how we're going to pull that through that small hole. Be gentle here, folks. You're not trying to start a lawnmower. If it's tough to pull it through, you're probably hooked on something. Back up and try again. Pull the wires all the way through and through the dash. Leave about 4 inches hanging out at the dash. Cut it, strip the wires back, and add the male connectors. This will give you a leftover piece of wire that we'll use for wiring in the rest of the switches later on. Take the remaining blue wire and make a wiring harness that looks something like this. This is going to be your ground circuit. The Rubicon relays work off of a switched ground. So you're going to put the black wire from the LED light, the backlight, and one of the wires from the harness into the yellow connector, and that will be grounded later. Connect the ground harness to the 2 lower tabs of the switches and the 2 wires that lead to the relays to the other 2 tabs on the switches. The LED backlight can be mounted in a couple different spots depending on the intensity level of the light that you want. The orange wire in the door harness is a great place to find power for the red lead of the backlight. With the wires in place, the backlight where you want it to be, snap the back cover back on and get ready to ground the whole system. Remember to plug in the factory locker and sway bar harness. A great place to ground the system is by using one of the factory copper screws that Jeep used to hold in the factory speaker. This makes for a nice clean install and no drilling new holes. Well, that's pretty much it. Pretty easy install. Zip tie any loose wires, tuck them away, snap the access panel back on, and you're done. Remember, this doesn't change how your factory switches work. It just gives you the ability to use your lockers whenever you want. 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, high range, or low range. Use your lockers how you want to use them.